What's up, guys? This is Chris from DraftDashboard.com.
Here are my DFS picks for MLB Friday, July 2nd.
These picks apply for DraftKings and FanDuel. Before I get started, please drop a like on this video and hit that red subscribe button
And hit that bell icon.
so you don't miss our new videos.
In this video, I'm going to go over my top DFS picks for today's MLB slate. And if you stick around to the very end of this video, we'll use the Draft Dashboard tools to make a DFS lineup using the picks we just made. Okay guys, we have a 14 game slate tonight, so let's take a look at the pitcher position. Now, if you want to pay up for pitcher, take a look at Max Scherzer. He's pitching against the Los Angeles Dodgers. Max Scherzer, he's giving up a .676 OPS versus lefties and a .630 OPS versus righties. He's facing 4 lefties and 5 righties. And I didn't find this pick really too interesting until I saw that the Dodgers have only hit 14 of his last 79 pitches. So that's a 177 batting average. He's 11,000 FanDuel salary, and he's 500 less on DraftKings. He has an ERA of 2.14. His record is 7-4 on the season, pitching an average of 94 pitches per game, averaging 42 fantasy points per game, and he scored 46 and 42 fantasy points in the last 2 games. So I like Max Scherzer here versus the Los Angeles Dodgers. Okay, now I prefer going with this pitcher, saving a little bit of salary. He doesn't have as tough of a matchup. Actually, he has a much easier matchup in terms of batting power here. I like Lance Lynn from pitching against the Detroit Tigers. Lance Lynn, he's giving up a .647 OPS versus righties, facing 4 righties, but he only gives up a .584 OPS versus lefties, facing 2 lefties, and he only gives up a .524 OPS versus switch hitters, and he's facing 3 switch hitters tonight. So on top of that, the Tigers have only hit 11 of his last 64 pitches. That's a 172 batting average, and he's only 10,000 FanDuel salary, and he's 300 less on DraftKings. He has an ERA of 2.06. His record is 7-3 on the season, pitching an average of 92 pitches per game, averaging 37 fantasy points per game. He scored 21, 15, and 37 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Lance Lynn here versus the Detroit Tigers. Okay, let's take a look at the catcher first base position. This position is stacked. I have 3 picks for you here. The first one is Carlos Santana with a 28% batting advantage over a low salary pitcher, J.A. Happ. Carlos Santana is batting 13% better versus lefty pitchers, batting a .806 OPS versus lefties. And J.A. Happ, he pitches his worst ball versus switch hitters, giving up a .859 OPS versus switch hitters. Now I like this pick because Carlos Santana is 10 for 22 with a .455 batting average and a 1.156 OPS versus Happ. That's a pretty big sample size. He's 3,300 FanDuel salary. He's 1,000 more on DraftKings. Projected at 10.5 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 10 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 6, 4, and 12 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Carlos Santana here versus J.A. Happ. Oh, and Vegas thinks this is going to be a high-scoring game. 10 runs scored in this game. That's their over-under. So there's a lot to like with Carlos Santana. Okay, another player I like is Yuli Gurriel with a 55% batting advantage over a low-salary pitcher, Sam Hentges. Yuli Gurriel is batting 25% better versus lefty pitchers, batting a .942 OPS versus lefties, and Sam Hentges pitches his worst ball versus righty batters, 30% worse than his pitch to lefties, giving up a 1.052 OPS versus righties. There's no at-bats versus Hentges yet, and Yuli Gurriel is $3,200 FanDuel salary. He's $1,900 more on DraftKings, projected at 9.5 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 11 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 4, 6, and 9 fantasy points in the last 3 games. And Vegas thinks this is going to be a high-scoring game. 9.5 runs scored in this game. That's their over-under. So I like Yuli Gurriel here versus Sam Hentges. Okay, and another player I like is Salvador Perez with a 40% batting advantage over that same low-salary pitcher, J.A. Happ. Salvador Perez is batting 12% better versus lefty pitchers, batting a .990 OPS versus lefties, and J.A. Happ is giving up a .845 OPS versus righties. And I like this pick because Salvador Perez is 9 for 23 with a .391 batting average and a 1.348 OPS versus Happ. 4 out of those 9 hits are for home runs. So Salvador Perez just absolutely crushes J.A. Happ, and he's only $3,100 FanDuel salary. He's $2,000 more on DraftKings, projected at 11.1 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 10 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 0, 28, and 3 fantasy points in the last 3 games. And we know Vegas thinks this is going to be a high-scoring game. 10 runs scored in this game. That's their over-under. So I like Salvador Perez here versus J.A. Happ.
Real quick, guys, I got great news. For a limited time, we're offering a full 30-day trial to Draft Dashboard. You can try all of our DFS tools for all sports. You can try the Position Optimizer, where you can see the top players ranked for each position. And we added a new Player Trends tool, where you can see the top salary differences between FanDuel and DraftKings. It's a really good tool to help you pick out value for the site that you're playing on. Oh, and if you're tired of doing research every day, we just added a cheat sheet that shows hand-picked plays for the slate. No confusing stat lines, no headaches, just a simple cheat sheet that shows the absolute best players for your lineups.
Okay, let's take a look at the second base position. I'm going to give you a value play here. I like Ramon Urias with a 22% batting advantage over Griffin Canning. Ramon Urias, he's batting 17% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .951 OPS versus righties. And Griffin Canning, he pitches his worst ball versus righty batters, giving up a .834 OPS versus righties. There's no at-bats versus Canning yet. And Ramon Urias is $2,200 FanDuel salary. He's only $500 more on DraftKings, projected at 9.8 fantasy points here tonight. He's only averaging 7 fantasy points per game on the season, but he scored 0, 38, and 10 fantasy points in the last 3 games. And Vegas thinks this is going to be a high-scoring game. 9.5 runs scored in this game. So I like Ramon Urias here versus Griffin Canning. Okay, let's take a look at the third base position. I like Rafael Devers with a 52% batting advantage over Frankie Montas. Rafael Devers is batting 30% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .963 OPS versus righties. And Frankie Montas, he pitches his worst ball versus lefty batters, giving up a .879 OPS versus lefties. And Rafael Devers is 2 for 3 with a .667 batting average and a 1.667 OPS versus Montas. He's $3,700 FanDuel salary. He's $1,300 more on DraftKings, projected at 10.2 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 13 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 45, 9, and 9 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Rafael Devers here versus Frankie Montas. Okay, let's take a look at the shortstop position. I like Carlos Correa with a 32% batting advantage over a low-salary pitcher, Sam Hentges. Carlos Correa is batting a .820 OPS versus lefties, and Sam Hentges, he throws his worst ball versus righty batters, 30% worse than his pitch to lefties, giving up a 1.052 OPS versus righties. There's no at-bats versus Hentges yet, and Carlos Correa is $3,800 FanDuel salary. He's $1,400 more on DraftKings, projected at 9.5 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 12 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 0, 12, and 12 fantasy points in the last 3 games. And we know Vegas thinks there's going to be 9.5 runs scored in this game. That's their over-under. So I like Carlos Correa here versus Sam Hentges. Okay, moving on to the outfield position. I like Starling Marte with a 23% batting advantage over a low-salary pitcher, Drew Smyly. Starling Marte is batting a .792 OPS versus lefties, and Drew Smyly throws his worst ball versus righty batters, 28% worse than his other pitches, giving up a .748 OPS versus righties. And I like this pick because Starling Marte is 4 for 9, batting a .444 batting average and a 1.111 OPS versus Smyly. And I like this pick because he's only $3,400 FanDuel salary and $900 more on DraftKings. So I think that price is pretty reasonable for his upside. He's projected at 13.6 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 13 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 15, 0, and 0 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Starling Marte here versus Drew Smyly. Okay, now I'm going to give you a value play. I like Jake Fraley with a 59% batting advantage over Kyle Gibson. Jake Fraley is batting 49% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .837 OPS versus righties, and Kyle Gibson throws his worst ball versus lefty batters, 10% worse than his pitch to righties, giving up a .753 OPS versus lefties. There's no at-bats versus Gibson yet, but I like this pick because Jake Fraley is only $2,500 FanDuel salary. He's $600 more on DraftKings, projected at 11.4 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 11 fantasy points per game on the season, and he scored 25, 3, and 6 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Jake Fraley here versus Kyle Gibson. And I guess real quick while we're here, another value play you can take a look at is Garrett Cooper with a 54% batting advantage over that low salary pitcher, Drew Smyly. Garrett Cooper is batting 26% better versus lefty pitchers, batting a .991 OPS versus lefties. And Drew Smyly, he throws his worst ball versus righty batters, 28% worse than his other pitches, giving up a .748 OPS versus righties. There's no at-bats versus Smyly yet, and Garrett Cooper is $2,500 FanDuel salary, $700 more on DraftKings, projected at 13.2 fantasy points here tonight. He's averaging 8 fantasy points per game on the season, and he scored 19, 3, and 6 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Garrett Cooper here versus Drew Smyly.
If you want to try all these daily fantasy tools for yourself, click the link in the description below this video or just go to draftdashboard.com. You can use our DFS lineup optimizer to build quality lineups using our picks and your own custom player pool. Click the link in the description below this video and try all these daily fantasy tools right now. Thanks so much for watching. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit that bell icon so you can get instant updates whenever we post a new video. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, please smiggity smash that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Oh, and please comment below with your favorite player for this NBA slate. I love to hear what you guys have to think. Thanks again and good luck.